Hello, every pony. Was I say every pony? God. Hello, everybody. It's me. I'm horse famous now. Congrats. But who am I? I am Gara the author. You might know me from Fimfic. I write a lot of comedies, and I also write a lot of stories about horses fuffing. Don't mind the whole deer in the headlight look I got going on. I am just absolutely terrified to talk in front of an audience. Congratulations. I am the consolation prize. They took away the entire writing room, and you're stuck with me and then later Mono. So I'm the warm-up act to make sure that people actually still watch when Mono's still around. This is my second ever panel I've ever hosted. The first one I've ever done sober, so hopefully I'll remember it this time around. Let's see, and for this panel I wrote a lovely script, and let's see how far I can get into it before they pull the plug on me. So, first I'll start off by talking about what is comedy. Comedy has a long historical origin, dating back to the ancient times, where all the way back in ancient Greece, rich Athenians would pay large sums of money to poor saps like myself to write plays about how their chief rivals are a bunch of cuckolds. It evolved from there to go to the Romans, and then later to the English, where we have William Shakespeare, who also kept that tradition live by writing lovely comedies about cuckoldry. It turns out that rule number one of comedy is that historically cuckoldry will always be funny. In our community, comedy takes many forms. It can take the form of our horse-famous aristocracy making YouTube videos where they react to things. That's always a fan favorite. For our visual storytellers who do comics and funny pictures, our petite bourgeois, if you would, all the way down to the lowly peasantry, which is us horse authors, who write long-winded Word documents and sob into them, wondering why we picked the least profitable medium imaginable. Comedy is something that we all took a part of because we were all bullied mercilessly in high school. I'm sure of it. We're all bronies here. And it's a coping mechanism. And as that, comedy is a thing that is adored by a lot of people. It's like dramas, romances, adventures. It allows us to escape our utterly miserable world and spend a little time reveling in something brighter. There is a catharsis in comedy, an ability to laugh at everything terrible going on in the world. So first I'll talk about the core concepts of comedy. The first thing you need to know about written comedy at its core is about character interactions. So what I mean by this is that most literary comedy plays heavily into the usage of dialogue. Conversations are generally the mechanism used to tell the joke, and things like slapstick and visual comedy just don't carry over to literature as well. That's not saying that it's impossible to integrate these things into a written story, but most successful comedic stories have a heavy focus upon dialogue. That means that the best comedies within Fimfic are generally conversations between a group of ponies or humans. I would recommend somewhere between 2 to 4 characters. If you do any more than 4, you can get kind of weighed down with the number of personalities you need to balance, but what do I know? There are probably far more qualified people to give talks on. That means, since it's a dialogue, you need to have characters that work well together. Do they have chemistry? Are they likable? Are they two individuals who work well together in the format of the moment? They need to bounce off each other naturally, and their interactions can't feel forced and painful to read. Often the best comedies in literature are just two friends being total idiots together. Think about how much fun you have shooting the shit with your friend when you're drinking or experimenting with substances, and think of those moments, and those are the moments that translate over best to written comedy. Next, I'll talk about how comedy is about subverting expectations. It's crass, it's dirty, and it's raunchy. Well, while it's important to stay true to a character, a good comedy knows how to pervert a character slightly or play into one of their traits to a degree that they wouldn't normally make sense in the canon material. The characters in a comedy are usually hot messes that are barely functional as sentient beings. Though to counter this, it's often a good idea to integrate or include a character called like the straight man or the straight mare or the straight edge character who can counter them all by being the voice of reason. An example from my own fics is I have a fic called Celestia and Luna are well-adjusted adults, and in this fic I often portray Celestia, Luna, and Twilight as utter disasters. They are sociopaths, drug addicts, nymphos, and all types of things that they aren't normally. What's important is making your reader believe with the smallest margin of the smallest suspension of disbelief imaginable that these are still the characters they love. Then to counter that, I have Princess Cadence be the straight man or the straight mare. She's the functional member of the crew who can be there to be the voice of reason to counter all the shenanigans of the other three. But also, it's important is you can subvert expectations further if your story progresses a long time, like Celestia and Lunar Well-Adjusted Adults is a 10 or 15 chapter fic that's still ongoing. As the fic progresses, you can take the straight man and then you can subvert expectations by having the straight man be the character who subverts expectations by having them make mistakes. Have them be the one who fucks up or makes a mistake. Yeah. Another fic that is an example of that is Learning to be a Lady, where Rarity starts off as a rather droll and boring character talking about tea party etiquette and noble titles. But as the story progresses, I pull the rug out from under the audience and have her start discussing things like one-night stands and cocaine, all with a teen rating because FimFic has one of the best rating systems in the world for showing stuff to 13-year-olds, apparently. To give a non-MLP example, I will talk about the YouTube videos starring Scott Sterling. I don't know if any of you have ever seen those videos, but the whole core concept of the joke is there's this football and later volleyball player by the name of Scott Sterling, who's a pro sports player playing for a college team, and the whole comedy comes from the fact that throughout all of his matches, he takes balls repeatedly to the face. And it subverts your expectations about pro sports because you don't expect a player to repeatedly get bludgeoned in the face by a ball. And it further subverts your expectations by talking about things like how pro sports, you wouldn't see coaches keeping injured players on the field, or you wouldn't see an audience cheering as a character is on the verge of being knocked unconscious. That's where the comedy comes from in that skit. But the thing about subverting expectations is you subvert them to a degree. Wacky randomness may be subverting expectation, but if it doesn't have a logical train of thought like leading to the subversion, it just comes off as wacky and random, and that rarely works unless you're dealing with a character like Pinkie Pie. Next, I'll talk about how, usually as a core concept of being kind of crass, sex can sell in comedies. It's been true with every comedy. It's true for romance. It's the same with action, drama, horror, and suspense. People love this stuff. Comedies can be crude, and if you have a solid grasp of the concepts necessary, it's always a hit. Think of American Pie. Like, our best comedies from the 90s and 2000s are all these really crass and naughty high school and college flicks. And I integrate that into my work with stuff like Learning to be a Lady, The Clock Tower, and OnlyFans, where I use sexuality as a thing to create discomfort and taboo, which can work into the characters to make them act awkward or to subvert expectations about characters and to all around generate laughs. When writing about sex, it's important to remember to be funny, so focus on the angle of it causing tension and have the characters who are more sexually liberated play onto that tension and awkwardness by making the other characters awkward. That's where the laugh comes from. It's a very nervous energy laugh. Like, for example, in OnlyFans, the whole joke is Sunset and Twilight talk about their work as camgirls, and much to the shock and horror of the other members of the main seven. Comedy is about timing. Your jokes need to line up just right to really pay off. Don't be too slow and don't drag it out. Set up the joke and then tell it. Don't drag out the moment, but also ensure you give the right amount of build-up necessary to make it enjoyable. Never have a conversation needlessly carry on. Your readers are here to get from one laugh to the next laugh, and they don't need a whole bunch of cartilage and mess in the way of getting between their jokes. So what your job as a writer to do is to make sure the progression from joke 1 to joke 2 to joke 3 to joke 4 is as smooth and painless as possible. That being said, don't rush your setup, or else you risk damaging the value of your jokes you are trying to tell. A good way to figure out pacing and a good way to figure out if your joke progression is good and if your jokes are hitting right is to always get feedback. Feedback is one of the most important things you can do as a writer, and especially as a comedy writer. Get proofreaders, get pre-readers, get patrons, and get people who will just read your fic and give you very honest feedback. You want to make sure it's honest feedback, because a lot of people will not be honest, and then you'll put out a stinker of a fic, and then you'll be depressed. It's very sad, trust me. Also, subvert expectations. Yet again, we're going to loop back into subverting expectations. Sometimes it can work in your favor to set a joke up early, kind of let it rest on the back burner, keep it there in the back of somebody's mind, and then very late into the fic, when you're not expecting that joke to come up, hit them with it. It's kind of like that foreshadowing stuff that actually competent writers like to talk about. Comedy requires a breadth of pop culture and real-world knowledge, both modern and classical. No comedy is meant for everyone, or even a majority of individuals. Jokes often have a narrow margin of people who get them, and any fic that expects to cater to everybody is a comedy that is destined to fail. You gotta figure out what you want your target audience to be, and how to cater to that target audience. So when you're lining up your references you use, your jokes you use, ensure that you know what the target audience likes. So, like, if you want to tell jokes about, like, an obscure anime, I'm sure some of you like anime. Not many people are going to understand your weird and niche anime, so your people you're going to cater to is very small, and you cannot expect much success with your comedy fic. But if you try to appeal to fans of something more popular, or fans of a genre, you might have more success getting into the feature box, which is what we all want to do, right? We want to be on the front page for everyone to see. So, what is the femfic audience going to like? Well, see what's popular, what has been trending lately, what fics have been hitting the feature box lately, what comedies have been hitting the feature box lately. Are they human and equestria? Are they naughty? Are they E-rated? Are they T-rated? Are they M-rated? Find out what's popular. Always fun to write a fic about recent drama. I know people love to get into the feature box with that. I know Nighty had to make a rule about that to stop that from happening. See what's trending on Twitter. That's going to be a controversial opinion, but in my opinion, Twitter is a valuable resource as a comedy writer. There are a ton of fantastic jokes to steal from Twitter. Twitter is a great place to get feedback on jokes in isolation. And Twitter is a pretty fun website all around, in my controversial opinion. I know a lot of you are adverse to the leftist neoliberal Bolshevik bluebird, but go ahead, make an account. Why not? There's some fun people to follow on there. I'm sure you'll find somebody. A lot of my best comedy is directly inspired by jokes or comedy I've seen elsewhere. I shamelessly rip off stage comedians or comedy movies. I've done chapters around movies like Death of Stalin, and I've also done scenes around stuff like Austin Powers and Bo Burnham. Why reinvent the wheel? We're not drama authors. We don't actually have standards. We can steal jokes, go hog wild. Everybody does it in the comedy genre, trust me. Just don't get caught. Comedy improves every genre. Comedic relief characters have been a huge thing for ages now. Think about how many comedic relief characters become fan favorites in their respective universe, in their respective fill. That being said, if your comedy skills are kind of shit, then your comedic relief character is going to be cringy and not relieving, and they might be a detriment to your film, book, whatever. So that being said, get a solid grasp of comedy before you decide to write a comic relief character. Comedy can be used to ease tension when you need to ease it. If you need to ease back from a big moment, it can help to crack a joke. The example I thought up of while writing the script was, if you've ever seen the movie Inglourious Bastards, which I'm sure they're going to love me for referencing a rated R film, but if you've ever seen that movie, think about Christoph Waltz's character and how he can deliver these really relieving jokes in these really tense moments. It's no mistake that that his lines are some of the most quotable and some of the most memorable from the film, and that his moments are some of the most memorable because you're given these really tense situations, and then he just comes in and acts like a jackass, and everybody's laughing. It's great. Comedy has been used for ages now to improve every genre. Take William Shakespeare, for example. That guy we all had to read in middle and high school. I hope you're all from middle and high school. At least. But in Macbeth, for example, the most serious of Shakespearean plays, the one where everybody's serious and dying and there's murder and mayhem. Shakespeare was an author who had to cater to both a high-grade audience of nobility who would pay for the stage play performance, they would be there for the story, and then there's also a whole bunch of rabble and peasants who would be there to my apologies, excuse me, who would be there to enjoy crash jokes, to enjoy the fun of the play. And in Macbeth, this big serious play, Shakespeare dedicates a whole scene for Macduff, who's the main hero slash antagonist, to talk about erectile dysfunction by alcohol. Look it up. It's actually a thing. They dedicate a whole scene to that because Shakespeare knew that people will laugh at that and people will pay money to laugh at that. Comedy can be used to humanize characters. As mentioned with Inglourious Bastards, it makes the evil antagonist SS officer the most memorable character from it. And in other Tarantino films, it's the same way. He gives these very characters you shouldn't like, he makes them funny to make them likable. Many historical figures had a great sense of humor and used humor in everyday life. For example, Abraham Lincoln, he was essentially the first comedian president. He was likable because he would tell funny stories all the time. So get a good sense of comedy and you might be president in 1860. Just a heads up if you ever get time travel. Everyone appreciates a joke, and hybrid genres have also been all the rage for ever. Think about a rom-com. Rom-coms have been super popular for 20 years now, and they sell like crazy. And the end of the day, we all like to think of ourselves as internet users and kind of above all the rabble, and we're more enlightened, but in the end of the day, we're all just monkeys who are hardwired to enjoy these animalistic impulses. We love relationships, we love comedy, and when we mash them together, they go like peanut butter and jelly. Somebody I would point out is Monochromatic kind of does that in Love Her Fix. And now that is the only breadth of filmfic knowledge I have at this time. Action comedies have also been a hit with the rise of superhero movies. Think about how important witty and fun banter is in those universes. The Marvel Cinematic Universe would be nothing without characters like Ant-Man and Spider-Man giving witty dialogue. Comedy, as I said, could break tension in something like horror or suspense. If you're trying to ease back from the murderer chasing a pair of teens, have them crack a joke. It'll kill the tension and kind of get the people who are watching it onto a more level head. Dark comedies. I love dark comedies. Dark comedies are some of my favorite comedies. There's nothing like laughing at something utterly horrible going on. And when writing a dark comedy, you have to remember it's a lot less funny ha 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 and a lot more funny peculiar. Like in a fic I wrote called A Murder Most Foul, the comedy isn't so much about witty lines, which there are a few of. But the comedy comes from the fact that our Griffin protagonist is getting advice from his dead John about hiding his body, after an evening of prostitution gone afoul. So like with Subverting Expectations, if the audience thinks they should be feeling one thing, you hit them with something else, that can pay off really well in terms of laughs and in well of audience retention and audience memorability of your fic and scene and whatever you're writing. An example from a film I watched is Cavalry. This is a memory that has stuck with me for 5 years now, even though it's a pretty unpopular film. In this film, the film is about an Irish priest who is being hunted by a murderer in his small town. And when he finally gets caught by the murderer and is about to be executed by the murderer goes, "Do you have any last words?" The priest pauses and goes, "You won't believe me." And the murderer kind of gestures with his gun and goes, "Well, just say it." And the priest sighs and says, "I'm mostly a myth, they'll never find out how Moby Dick ends," which makes the murderer laugh, and then in turn it makes the audience laugh because that's not something you would expect somebody to say when there's a gun pointed at their face. Comedies tend to be shorter and are either centered upon a single joke or a few jokes strung together. So what you should do with a comedy is you should line up either one punchline or several punchlines and weave them together. Don't put filler or useless jokes or comments in unless you really have to. Look, we've all been there. We've all been at 800 words, and you're like, shit, I need to get 300 words to make this postable on FemFic. In that case, your B or C material will work perfectly fine. I'm sure. I'm not sure. Don't overstay your welcome. If your story just drags on and your best material is used up, then you're just begging for a downvote or no vote to your story, which doesn't help you get featured, which, don't you want to get featured? Get featured. The average comedy chapter is usually under 5,000 words, with most being around 2,000 to 3,000 words. Just look at some of the top-rated fics on FemFic, and look at the comedies. You'll see that a lot of them have very short chapters. There's hardly any very long chapters when it comes to comedy. You won't see something like a 21,000 word comedy chapter. Outside of FemFic, look at something like movies. How long are the comedy scenes? How frequent are the cuts between scenes? How many jokes are crammed into a scene? An example I have from a film is the film Death of Stalin, which is a favorite of mine. And it's the morning scene. There are 5 cuts in the morning scene where they are all mourning Stalin. Cut 1 has Beria and Khrushchev whispering to each other and ribbing each other to try and stay composed around Stalin's coffin. Cut 2 has Stalin's son running through the mourning chamber and screaming his head off about a conspiracy, which has Beria make another rib at Khrushchev. Cut 3 has the meaty punchline where Stalin's son is talking to the Chinese delegation about how his father's brain has been shipped off to America to be experimented on by New York Zionist queers in petticoats. Cut 4 has Zhukov come in and punch him in the stomach, and Cut 5 has Stalin's daughter berating them. Using cuts, the movie is able to lower the amount of time in between the jokes and make the jokes flow much faster and much quicker, so you move from one laugh to the next in rapid succession. No filler, no meat, you just get through the jokes. Something like TV. Look at how a comedic TV show does its cuts. See how long the scenes are. I bring up SNL, The Daily Show, or This Hour Has 22 Minutes if you're Canadian. And you have to look, and like most skits are 30 seconds, 1 minute or 2 minutes. You'll rarely find skits that are longer than that. I know SNL hasn't been especially good as of late, but if you look at some of the older skits which were good, then that rule may apply unless I am lying to you out of ignorance. Look at the show itself. Wow, this is an MLP panel. Maybe I should talk about MLP. It's just, it's not especially fresh in my memory because it's been off the air for 2 years and Pony life just doesn't scratch that same itch. But it's a good source to learn how to write an E-rated comedy, which obviously I'm not very good at if my dialogue this panel has been any proof of. So you want to look at how they do their jokes. Their jokes are often energetic and attention-grabbing, a lot more of the slapstick, but when they do have jokes that are more about conversations, they are quick, they're attention-grabbing, and they're meant for a younger audience. But also you have to look at the jokes they slip in under the radar. MLP is fantastic for being a multi-layered comedy. It has jokes that make the kids laugh, and then a more subtle joke that will make the adults smile. That's why we're a bunch of adults at My Little Pony convention on the internet talking about the show. If it wasn't good for the adults, then we wouldn't be here 10 years later. Holy shit, how did the ride go on this long? A good example from a more recent season, and a good example that's actually fresh in my memory because I've never watched the show after I've watched it the first time, is episode 200, Sparkles 7. I love how they do this. I love how they set up the joke with the geese, how they foreshadow the geese, repeatedly show off the geese. Hey, look at these geese. And then at the very end, they break into the chamber, and there's no geese, except Luna spins around on her chair and is petting a goose. A little point I want to bring up is it's not a bad idea to look at stand-up performances. Stand-up is often just verbal storytelling. It's listening to comedians. It's often just verbal storytelling. It's very rarely like traditional jokes nowadays, and it's more telling an amusing story and getting the audience to laugh by being amusing while telling the story. So it's a good idea when you're watching a stand-up performance to listen to the comedian's pacing and plot progression. It's important to see what words and language they use to make their audience laugh. It's important to look at the audience and see what makes the audience laugh. You'll find that a lot of the time it's maybe Maybe it's talking about breaking the law. Often that's mostly the thing that gets the most laughs, apparently. Twitter's also a great platform for this because you can experiment with storytelling on Twitter and see the reaction Twitter gives you. And there are many jokes which will never see the light of FimFic because the little blue bird did not give me enough blood at the altar. I was supposed to tell a story here, but I will not. When toying with comedy ideas, give your friends the potential short description and see how they react to it. Are your friends reluctantly laughing at your joke? That's often the sign of a poor joke or a joke that hasn't landed properly. A bad sign, but something that could be improved, maybe with timing, or maybe with pacing, or maybe with setup. There's very rarely a situation where a joke is dead on arrival, and it can often be salvaged with feedback. Like I said earlier, feedback is very important, and honest feedback is even more important. Does your joke need to be explained further? Yet again, another issue that's not great, but it might just be a pacing issue, or maybe you rushed your punchline a little too hard. The elevator pitch is very important, and there's also tons of servers. Well, tons. I'm going to give one example. So there's one server that is very good with experimenting for comedies, and that is the Quills and Sofa Speedwrite server. I love that server, and I love to write comedies for it. It's a great place to get feedback on fics, and it's a great place to write short fics, which that's what we want with comedy, right? We want short fics. Previous point, fics are short. We want those fics short, and Speedwrite will help you write short fics. And even though they're mostly just dull and boring drama writers, some of them do appreciate comedy, so they're a good place to get feedback. And in fics like Learning to be a Lady and Spitfire's Worst Nightmare, both came from it. Anyways, let us now talk about the process behind how I tell a story after I take a sip of this beer. Step one of being a writer is to be chronically depressed. It's been proven over and over again that that's the best way to write comedy, and that all comedy comes from suffering. But for real, step one is the idea. That was a terrible joke. This can come from all sorts of places. Sometimes you'll find a funny moment in a movie or on Twitter or a dozen places, and you'll just want to repackage that joke you heard into something for MLP. Like I said, we all steal ideas. That's what comedy comes from. It's all about being inspired by jokes. Sometimes you'll be shooting the shit and an idea will hit. Other times you may be experimenting with substances and an idea will hit. The best thing to do is to keep those ideas jotted down somewhere and then reflect on them later. Can some of these ideas stand on their own? Could you take multiple ideas and weave them together into a coherent narrative? And then, congrats, you now have a coherent narrative. So now it's time to start formulating that narrative. And with that, you should take your jokes and divide them into 3 categories is what I do. I have A idea jokes, B idea jokes, and C idea jokes. A idea jokes are the flagship jokes of the story. They're the climax joke. They're the big, meaty joke that is supposed to get everybody laughing, or at least an amused smile from the audience who will hopefully give it an upvote. And this is, like I said, the big, meaty punchline. And then the B ideas are more filler moments. I know I said don't use filler if you don't have to, but it's a good idea that if your A idea can't stand on its own, B idea jokes are lesser laughs. They are lesser ideas that will keep the reader engaged until they hit the A idea. And then finally you have the C ideas, which are just either filler when you desperately need it, or maybe they could be used for a cheap laugh in something that isn't a comedy. Like they might be an amusing thing to throw into one of your action fics or one of your romances, if you write those things. Testing out ideas. Like I said, feedback gets lots and lots of feedback. Now writing. Since this isn't a general writing advice panel, I'm not going to really give you too much advice on how to write. But what you should do is try to set a rhythm and schedule for writing. Comedic ideas might come from inspiration, but the art of weaving together ideas and writing ideas can't always rely on a mad dash for inspiration to save your ass. So really what you should do is you should develop a schedule and you should try to stick to it. I generally do 2,000 words of writing a day at minimum. That's a bit intense, so maybe set yourself at a goal of like 500. That's more reasonable, I would assume. And then you move on to proofing. Your fic is now written. Now you have to proof it. Proofing it yourself is the first step, and what I would suggest is to be a verbal proofreader. Comedies are very dialogue heavy, and I'll say that they should probably be verbally proofread. It helps you understand the tone and rhythm you are trying to create, and helps with the delivery of the joke. Helps with the delivery. When you verbally proofread, you can understand the tone of the dialogue. You can understand the pacing, the cadence, where you might get cut up, where like the characters might get caught up in dialogue, where they might sound awkward, where they might sound out of character. Verbally proofreading helps with that a lot. It is perfect for dialogue-heavy formats, in my opinion, but also, now we're going to talk about other proofreaders. Getting that feedback. That feedback is important. Get feedback. So, getting other proofreaders, very helpful, because verbally proofreading, I still managed to somehow get around 30 to 40 typos a story. 30 to 40 typos a story, and these people are perfect for finding them all. My latest story had 240 of them. Very helpful having those found by somebody else, since apparently I can't find them. Uploading your story. Study comedic names. Study the names and cover art of other comedies. For a while there, X-Pony, verbs Y noun, was very popular. The number one rated fic on FimFic for a while was Twilight Sparkle Goes to Hell, which Twilight Sparkle is the pony, goes is the verb, and to hell is the noun she is doing. One of the early comedies was Luna, was it Luna uses an abacus? Luna uses a toaster? It was something like that. There's still some life in that. I still see comedy titles that get featured that have that type of set structure, so it might be worth looking into. Comedic adjectives. Pick energetic adjective. Pick adjectives that fit your comedy, but also subverting expectations. Make them think it might be a serious fic, and then pull them in for a punchline and reveal that it's a comedy or a dark comedy. Cover art. Silly cover arts that help with the title. And most importantly about cover art is please get permission. I've seen this at least 3 times on FimFic, which might seem low, but that's still 3 times too many, where an artist did not ask for permission to get cover art, and then the artist is in their comments going, hey, I don't want my art used like this. These things should not be happening to Flurry Heart with my art attached to it. So, yes, please ask the artist for permission and be honest with the artists. I know a lot of you might only enjoy having a FimFic account, but a Twitter, a Fur Affinity, and DeviantArt, you get those 3, and then you're golden for asking for permission for art. 95% of artists will be on one of those 3 platforms. And if you find the 5% who are using something like Ink Bunny, then maybe don't ask them. I would not suggest going to Ink Bunny. And hey, if you can't find a cover art, if you can't get permission to use cover art, or you can't find a cover art, this show has like literally 100,000 amusing screen caps to call upon. Also very helpful. Post story. This is where you dissect your story and see if it did well. Did it land well? What are the comments saying? This is all very valuable data. Find out what people love. Examples are like after reading the comments and getting feedback from things like Celestia and Luna are well-adjusted adults, OnlyFans, and Learn to be a Lady, I learned that FimFic loves references to narcotics, loves disasters to characters, loves naughty characters, and FimFic also has a thing for sociopaths. Comedic characters who are sociopaths, apparently big on FimFic. Sequels. Honestly, I got no advice here. I've never written a comedic sequel, and I very rarely see a comedic idea that lasts to a second iteration and does anywhere near as well. An example of a comedy sequel that I think didn't do well is not from Pony, but from E3 of all places. I don't know if any of you ever seen the Devolver Digital E3 conference. The first year they did it, it was fantastic. It was funny, it was dark, and it had everybody talking about Devolver Digital on a level they've probably never been talked about before. But then they did it a second year, and I'm guessing a third year, and a fourth year, and the jokes were not as funny later on. So, like I said back at the pacing thing, don't overstay your welcome. Anyways, I will now examine a few of my fics and then talk about how they tackle some of these points. And just spoiler alerts, if you have not read these fics, this is a live stream, so I'm sorry for the next 5 to 10 minutes. It's going to be extremely painful, but if you're still here, you've already been here for 30 minutes of painful, so that's nothing new. So the first fic I'll talk about is Celestia and Luna Are Well-Adjusted Adults, which is arguably probably my most successful comedy. The character interactions. Most of the chapters at their core are discussions between 2 to 4 characters. The actions within those chapters are very small or are more there just to break up the dialogue, so the dialogue just doesn't become a script. That's what your action should be in a comedy, in my opinion. And the jokes are mostly about what happens in the dialogue and how the characters respond to the dialogue. Subverting expectations. Celestia is an alcoholic, Twilight is a perverted nympho, and Luna is a mixture of these two. These characters are all train wrecks and disasters who aren't capable of leading a local parks and recreation committee, let alone a fully functional kingdom. Inversely, Cadence is a hyper-functional one of the group, the straight man. Though, even on occasion, she fucks up, and when she fucks up, it makes it even funnier because everybody thinks she should be the functional one. Just don't overdo it with that, or else everybody will think she's just another one of the messed up characters. Timing. The jokes are snappy and come quick with very little build-up. It's pretty simple in this regard, and it's pretty much just 1 prime joke per chapter, maybe 2 prime jokes with a little bit of B material sprinkled in there if I need to make a word count or feel good about inflating my word count. Pop culture references. I reference all sorts of things. I reference other fan fictions. I reference films. I reference historical events. I reference modern events. Some chapters do not have references, but the vast majority of them do. Length. It's short. Most of the chapters are under 2,000 words. I think I have 1 chapter over 2,000 words. Another thing about writing short chapters is people are more likely to consume a bite-sized chunk of a story in one sitting, unlike a longer chapter. So if you publish in like 21,000 words, it's going to be hard to find somebody who's willing to sit through the entire thing, which pray for me because I'm about to release 16,000 words of stuff in the next couple of days, so I'm sure absolutely no one will upvote that. Next we'll be talking about 32 and Me, which is my 4th highest rated fic on FimFic and probably my 2nd best comedy. The character interactions. The entire fic is a dialogue between Twilight and her parents. The actions are meant to break up the dialogue and help it flow easier, and there are no large set pieces that distract us from this conversation. Subverting expectations. Do we think that Nightlight and Velvet would be swingers? Unlikely unless you're into a certain genre that I can't talk about. Do we appreciate that Twilight is actually dating her stepsister? Probably not. Are we ready for the revelation that all her friends are the daughters of a very virile Nightlight? Of course not. Timing. We head from one joke to the next joke in rapid succession with very little break or pause. Bam, we learn that Nightlight and Velvet are swingers. Bam, we learn that Twilight is dating her stepsister. Bam, we move on to a joke about why Lemonheart's coat is yellow. And then bam, it's a joke about how Twilight was with one of her stepsisters before. And yes, this fic is teen rated because God bless FimFic. Apparently they have a very wacky understanding of what is teen rated on that website. I knew when I was 13, I was not reading stuff like that. Pop culture. Honestly, this one doesn't have too many pop culture references, so I guess the pop culture rule I made up on the spot is situational. Length, 1.8k words. It comes fast and there's no wasted cartilage or fluff. It's efficient like a bumblebee. Learning to be a lady. One of my more popular fics. I don't know where it rates, but some people liked it and even got a voice reading, which is pretty rad. Character interactions, yada yada yada, it's a conversation, same old, same old. Subverting expectations, we start off with very mundane and canon rarity, talking about tea parties and royal etiquette and where a duke is to a count and where a count is to an emperor and boring shit like that. Then bam, she takes us on a wild creating course as she talks about one-night stands, cocaine, and why stallions love a lipstick that can leave a mark. Timing. Pacing starts off slow, almost boring, then bam, we slide right into a descent into madness where the jokes hit hard and fast with no breaks until you hit the very end of the fic. And then pop culture references. I based it heavily off of Sex and the City, or at least what I thought Sex and the City was, because I've never actually watched Sex and the City. Length. 1.4k words. Alright, I've been talking for 40 minutes, and I did have the question room open, so I do hope there's some questions in there. I did get added. That's terrifying. How did I get added? Weird. Anyways, let's look at the questions. RDT. Are there comedy stories that you've gotten stuck on or eventually dropped? If so, what were they about and what were the issues? Good. Actually, that's a good question because I recently wrote a comedy for Quills and Sofas called The Final Dream of 1963. And the whole story was about how Principal Luna was scarred from an event in her youth. And it turned out that event is the Kennedy assassination, which seemed like it would be funny, except I started writing it and it just was pure traumatizing and couldn't really find the joke in it. So that's why it got dropped. Oh no, 15-minute warning. Shit, I got... So that's one comedy idea that was dead on arrival. I have literally 63 safe for work comedy ideas, and I'm trying to think if there's any others I've failed to publish. No, I think the Kennedy one is the only one I've literally given up on. Let's see. Chair 754. Test. Good question. Twilight. Test failed successfully. Good question. Okay, Chair 754 for real. How do you make something dull to become funny? Subverting expectations. Like I said with Learning to Be a Lady, the dullness is... It starts with Rarity being very dull. She's talking about Tea Party etiquette. She's talking about royal etiquette. She's talking about etiquette, high society. She's talking about boring shit that no one gives a fuck about. And especially Sweetyville. Sweetyville does not give a shit. So we start off very dull. The dullness can even help because it gets the reader to be like, all right, when is the rug getting pulled out from under me? I saw that comedy tag. I saw that teen rating. I saw that narcotics tag. And then bam, after you do that dullness, then you subvert expectations. You find the way to pervert the dull thing. Like, what are some high society things that aren't dull? Oh, cocaine. High society people do cocaine. And then Sweetbell's like, what the fuck are you, what? So yeah, it's subvert your expectations. Start off dull, and then take that dull idea and take it in a funny direction. I haven't taken a sip of it in a while. Magnet Bolt is the first thing that comes to mind is showing characters in the scene reacting to the boredom. I don't think that was a question. I think that was an answer to somebody else. Oh god, I have 2 questions left and I have 13 minutes of airtime. People, give more questions for the love of God, please. Twilight asked, how do you keep motivated when a story that you put extra effort... Twilight sounds familiar. Why does she sound familiar? Twilight. Why does Twilight sound familiar? I have absolutely no idea why Twilight might sound familiar. Huh. Funny. Twilight. How do you keep motivated when a story that you put extra much work into doesn't get upvoted? I then sob in my Discord server and I go, guys, I didn't get upvotes. And then I sob in Quills and Sofa and go, guys, I didn't get upvotes. And then they upvote my story for me and then I feel good. But for real, the way that I stay motivated is just move on to the next project. I have 63 ideas. If one doesn't land, there's still 62 potential ideas that might land. And, you know, most of them do land. Sometimes a joke just doesn't work. I wrote a fic called The Clock Tower once, which really didn't land. And I was kind of distraught about that. But then I moved on and I wrote something called Fallout Equestria. It's a very serious AU. And man, that hit well. And then I felt good about myself. And then I didn't cry. It was great. Big girls don't cry. Sigma Sonic asked, any stories that you thought were good, but reaction was weak? How do you look so rad? I'll answer the rad question first and say, 2 years of pharmaceuticals, baby. and a really shitty haircut that I somehow managed to rock, and that's it. And a good choice of a shirt I found at a thrift store. Any stories that you thought were good, but the reaction was weak? That's a good question. Most of my dark comedies, none of my dark comedies get received especially well. For some strange reason, people don't like the death tag with the gore tag with the M rating. Don't know why they have such a knee-jerk hatred of that. Couldn't possibly imagine, but my dark comedies do not get received generally very well, and I think those are actually some of my best writing, in my opinion. I would have to go to filmfic.com and see if I could find other stories I didn't think did well. I'm completely blanking. That was a good question because it made me blank. Man, I wrote a lot of M-rated fics. Spitfire's Worst Nightmare. No, I'll just stick with that one instead of scrolling through Filmfic on everybody's time. That's probably the better idea. Sunny, how do you be funny fast, like in a speedwriting contest? Like I said, usually with a speedwriting contest, they give you a prompt and they give you about 30 minutes to get to that prompt. They give you 30 minutes to brainstorm. So what you do is you find out that big A joke, you find out that big prime material, you find out that punchline that's going to make everybody laugh, and then you just write like the wind and you get right to that idea, and then you get to that idea. So your whole fic should be structured around getting to that A fic and then recovering from that A. The whole thing should be getting towards that A material and then de-escalating from the A material. That's what your A joke should be, in my opinion. Why is I'm getting pinged? Oh shit, 10-minute warning. Sunny asked, so yeah, set up that A joke, get to it fast, get to it as fast as you can. Nice thing about speedwriting fics is they generally do not require 1,000 words, so you could write it for the speed fic event and then you can edit it into something better later. Like, the thing about speed contests is you need to realize your fic in them is never going to be as good as when you publish it. You're writing a rough draft, essentially. So it's okay if you make something that's like 800 words or 700 words or 999 words. Just write. Go for it. No one's watching. We're all shit with the time constraint. Twilight, your voice is amazing to listen to. Do you read fanfics? If not, why? Thank you. I never heard anybody say my voice was nice. I do not read fanfics. I don't have very good audio equipment. I am speaking this into an HD webcam, and my other headset is used for voice, is used for my job, and that's a really shitty mic. So that's the main reason I don't do fic readings, is because I do not have the equipment for it. Sunny, what skincare products do you use? It's called Cypritone. It completely kills my body's ability to produce testosterone. Turns out you get no acne if you have no testosterone in your body. I have literally less testosterone than a cis woman. What else do I have? I have 2 minutes, and then I want to do... Actually, I have a little bit more than 2 minutes. I have, let's say, 5 minutes. Stylistic preferences. There are a few authors, Etsy comes to mind, where their style is incredibly obvious. So is it worthwhile to build a unique style, or just write and see what comes out? I would hate to think I have a unique style, but if I have a unique style, then I would say I just built it by just writing. I would say write with the objective of telling a story and not building your own unique style. I know there are authors who have their own unique style of storytelling, but in my opinion, just write to tell a story, and if you accidentally build your own unique and fun way to tell a story that everybody loves, like Etsy or Mono or Signwolf or insert other popular author, then bonus. Go for it. But write to write a story. Everything else is bonus. Sigma Sonic. If you're at 999 words, what is one word you add and why is it moist? Sigma, you've seen my library. You know why I love to use the word moist. Twilight, could you tell us a bit about your Followed Equestria story? How long did it roughly take to write such a story? My Followed Equestria story is called Followed Equestria is a Very Serious AU. The whole premise of it is I take popular Followed Equestria stories and I parody them. Mostly I parody the work of Heartshine, who wrote Followed Equestria Project Horizon Speak. Wow, that is a long title. I love her fic. It's actually the only Followed Equestria fic I've ever actually read, so that's why most of my fic is centered around it. But I take the themes in Followed Equestria and I subvert them, like I said. Followed Equestria tends to be overly serious in a world of magical and mythical ponies, so I mock that. I bring us back to our silly ponies. Alright, I think... Well, I'll say anything else about the Followed Equestria story. I parody popular fics. I parody the themes I find silly. I find Followed Equestria very silly for taking itself far too seriously. Oh boy, I feel the mass of downvotes hitting all my fics. It's like Alderaan getting blown to shit. Sunny. Are there any comedy gold mines you think are undermined? Well, that 30-second pause was me not finding any, so unfortunately not off the top of my head. Maybe if I had more time to think about it. Anyways, I have 4 minutes left. Maybe one more question, then I'll do this. What is your favorite crack fic and why? What the hell is it? I'm trying to remember if I've ever actually read any crack fics. I'll say my own crack fic, because that's the only one that comes to mind. It was called In the Shadow of My Brother, and it's a crack fic about how Discord is the younger brother of Jerry Seinfeld. From The Seinfelds. Great fic, and I wrote it, so that's why I love it so much. I wish I could think of somebody else's crack fic. I am sorry about that. Anyways, 3 minutes, and I just want to give a couple of closing comments. I would like to say, first of all, we are all here at this con because we are here to support the artists of our fandom who unfortunately had their entire career canceled for at least a year. So if you haven't checked it out, please check out the vendor hall. I know Dawnfire has a lot of really cool bitrate merch to sell, and I know View has fantastic puzzles that I bought at BronyCon, and those puzzles are a lot of fun. I did the corners, and then I realized I did not have the attention span for puzzles, but if you do have the attention span for puzzles, do them. It's like $40 and it's a really high quality puzzle. And get the bitrate merch. Just buy the bitrate merch. Get the bitrate merch from Dawnfire. Just grab your credit card, like this one. Bitrate merch. I would like to say some words and give some words to who's following me. If you all know, the next panel is a shipping panel, which stars our lovely darling of the FimFic community, Monochromatic, who is also known in the DuckTales fandom as the Margaret Atwood of Duck Donald Yowie, and writes the most popular unpopular ship, Raretwy. I now have 2 minutes to say that if you want to talk about comedy or ponies fuffing, make sure to @ me in this server, except don't @ me about the fuffing. PM me about that. But I'm always open to talk. Hit me up on FimFic, hit me up on Twitter. Follow me at these 2 places. I am always free to talk. And by always, I mean I am sometimes free to talk. On my FimFic, I even have a server. And... Alright, 1 minute left, so I'll say have a good night, everyone, and it was great talking to you all, and I am now off to see what creative slurs 4chan has called me. Have a good night.